All right, it is 6 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started for this evening. So my name is Andrew Felton. I work with the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, and tonight I am joined by Laura Price with Design with Nature. Hey, Laura, how are you?
I'm doing well. I've
Uh,
got 10 yards of wood chips that I'm moving.
you are happy to be inside, and it will be waiting for you for tomorrow, I am
Yeah, I
sure.
think I got it about 6 weeks ago. It's been waiting.
There you go. Slowly chip away at it. That's what the spring is
Yeah,
for, isn't
that's
it?
right. No pun intended.
There you are. So tonight's presentation is our introduction to Naturescaping or Naturescaping Basics course. But before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So we are recording tonight's presentation, as many of you just heard. We will be posting that presentation or this recording onto our YouTube channel sometime later this week. So if you do miss anything, don't feel free that you won't be able to see it again. I will be sending out that recording to everybody. So I will be sending, as I mentioned, I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone who has signed up for tonight's presentation. In that email, you'll get a link to the recording, as well as a link to the presentation slides. So you will be able to see these slides again. And then any of the resources that we discussed tonight, I will also include in that email. So don't feel that you won't see any of the things that you're about to see again today. So you don't have to take rigorous notes, just sit back and enjoy the presentation from Laura. You will see two icons at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a chat icon as well as a Q&A icon. If you run into any technical issues or anything along those lines, please feel free just to use the chat icon to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to troubleshoot with you. If you have any questions tonight, please use the Q&A icon for those questions. We'll have time at the end to ask Laura any questions that you might have, and we'll just read those out on a first come, first serve basis. So if you have any questions at any point, just go ahead and put it in the Q&A and we will get to it at the very end of the presentation tonight. And finally, when you're exiting Zoom today, you'll see a prompt to take a survey. If you wouldn't mind just taking a couple of minutes to fill out that survey, it is a huge help for us in developing these workshops and webinars. And if you live in Washington County, we do have several printed material that we can send out to you. And you can select those in that survey as well. All right, Laura, would you mind switching my slide? Now, I mentioned earlier that I work for a conservation district, and we like just to take a minute at the top or so to talk a little bit about what conservation districts are, because many folks don't know what they are. So conservation districts are what's known as a special district. We're similar to a library or a fire department, things along those lines. But instead of putting out fires or lending books, we help our communities conserve natural resources. Natural resources like soil, water, plants, and wildlife habitat. And we do that through a variety of ways. We do that through educational offerings like the webinar you're joining tonight. We also offer technical advice. So we have specialists that can actually go out to your space and your site and talk about any sort of natural resource related issues you might be having. So say you were a farmer and you're having issues with erosion, or your field is becoming extra money because of the cattle that you run. We have specialists that can help you deal with that issue. We also have specialists that can work in the urban area, so helping folks install a naturescaping project or talk about stream side erosion in an urban property. We do have specialists that can come out and talk exactly to the problem that you might have. We also offer financial assistance, and we do that through a couple of different methods. If you're an organization, so if you were a part of a church or a community group, we have grants that can help fund for many projects. So say you wanted to start a community garden, or if you were a teacher that wanted to start a school garden, we have grants that can help you get started, as well as refurbish any of those existing projects that you might have. If you're an individual, we can also help pay for projects. Projects like installing a rain cistern or installing a naturescaping garden. We are able to help augment some of the funding because these things can be expensive, and we really want to make them as easy to do to our communities as possible. Now, whether you live in Washington County, which is where our focus is, or outside of Washington County, I want to encourage you to look up your local SWCD or conservation district. There's a conservation district for just about every county across the United States, and many of them offer similar programs and assistance as we do. So whether you're in Washington County or outside, a conservation district is there to help. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Laura, but I'll be back at the very end to help with some of the Q&A. Take us away, Laura.
Thank you, Andrew. So, well, naturescaping is a subject near and dear to my heart, and it's going to be a challenge, quite frankly, to cover this in an hour when it could be easily 4 hours. So I'll do my best. So in essence, we like to think of it as the practice of landscape design and care that mimics nature and benefits our watersheds, which is, it benefits our watersheds, our soil and water and plants, as Andrew indicated. And in essence, a big part of it is planting the right native plants in the right place. And you'll discover that plants grow in community because of that. The ones that like the same conditions will often be in community together. So notice that the next time you go out hiking in nature. So thinking about your goals for naturescaping, I think the first and highest one that most people are inspired by is to create wildlife habitat and bring wildlife into their yard, namely birds and pollinators, but so much more too that you might not see all the time, but they're there under the ground and in the logs and hiding in brush piles and piles of rocks. And I just want to remind you that why this is also important is because insects are the bottom of our food chain, and birds really rely on the protein of insects, especially to rear their young. And some of the other goals that you may have, and they're really listed here as naturescaping design principles. And so we're looking for alternatives to lawn and grass. I think there's something like 55, million acres. Basically, the size of Washington is how much lawn we have in our country. So that's a huge opportunity for habitat if we replace our lawn with something else. And namely, we're recommending replacing with native plants, and I'll get into that in a little bit, why they're so beneficial. And speaking of mimicking nature, we encourage vegetation layering. And again, we'll describe all of these as I go through. And year-round plant features, both in terms of food and pollination and shelter, etc., as well as our own aesthetic pleasures of year-round features. Wildlife habitat, and that involves a lot of different habitats, not just for birds and bees. Water conservation, which has become increasingly important with our climate change. And are already, 4 months of dry, that we need plants that can withstand that. Soil stabilization and improvement doesn't sound so sexy, but it's the stuff I get most excited about anymore, because it all begins with good soil and living soil. And rainwater solutions, we're tuned into our watersheds and keeping all of the silt and chemicals out of it. And so we have solutions for you in your yard to help that. And last but not least, energy conservation. Where you put your plants can really help with that. So, alternatives to lawn and grass. We're showing a couple examples of meadowscaping. It's looking definitely more natural and a little wild here. Not all of you may have opportunity for this if you have tight little yards, or maybe you do. It really depends on what you're inspired to do. But But there are other alternatives to lawns and grasses, namely ground covers, which we'll get into a little bit later. There are so many ground covers that can be used instead of lawn. And lawn alternatives, oops, I thought that was out of there. Sorry. And here we're showing just low covering of a variety of ground covers planted in a parking strip, which is a great place not to have to go down and mow lawn. Or you might even be inspired to remove some of your lawn, and that's where you put your vegetable garden, because they need as much sun as the lawn does to thrive and have abundant harvest. So that's another thing you can consider putting in your yard instead of lawn. So incorporating native plants, which we've already mentioned. The why is that, these are the many benefits. They're adapted to our soils. We tend to have naturally acidic soils here in the Northwest. So our native plants that were here all along are used to that. And they're also adapted to our climate, like I said, which has we're sort of a 2-season climate. We have a wet season for 8 months and 4 months of dry and hot. So our natives are used to that, though climate change is pushing that a bit. And there's many things we can do to help get them through our hot summers. And perhaps most importantly is that our native plants support a variety of birds, butterflies, bees, and other species. In fact, a lot of our insects are especially the pollinators, they prefer specific plants, especially the larva forms of all our butterflies and moths. The larvae feed on the leaves. And so we're paying more attention to having plants that are host to the caterpillars as well as if you want butterflies and bees, you need to be thinking of all of the caterpillars. And, adapt it to our culture. It means with our climate, it means we're going to be using less water. That saves money. And because they're less susceptible to common garden pests and diseases, there's savings there and no need to use the synthetic and chemical pest treatments. There's other ways to go. So when we're thinking about plant selection, right plant in the right place is sort of the motto we use. And this gets back to, plant communities that prefer the same conditions. This is just a couple quick examples on the left. This is a very sunny front yard that we're looking at. And we're seeing a whole array of plants that are very drought tolerant and love that sun. They're not all natives. This is a great place to blend in some of the more Mediterranean plants that grow here that are very drought tolerant. They do like good drainage, and we want to make sure. So a slope is a perfect place for that, where it will drain down the slope. And on the right, we're seeing just a little vignette of plants that love more shady conditions. And we're seeing the maidenhair fern here, and this is goat's beard in the back. This is a rhodie, probably not our native rhodie. And we have heuchera or coral bells. We do have natives, and there are several cultivated varieties that have the same kind of conditions that they prefer. Not sure if that's maybe a huckleberry in the back, but hard to tell from the photo. Oops. So we're not going into a long list of individual plants, but we're kind of grouped them by ground covers, which I mentioned is a really good alternative to lawns. And so we're seeing just 3 of them here: redwood sorrel, woodland strawberry, and Oregon sedum. Some of the others that you might think of are Knick works very well. And here are several, this would be in the low level. Speaking of layers, and we have several perennials. Perennials are herbaceous and they do disappear in the winter. There are a few evergreen perennials that I really like. This wild ginger, if it isn't freezing, this will tend to last through the winter, semi-evergreen. And here we're seeing our native bleeding heart, the western red columbine, and camas, which is a bulb. And most of these that you're looking at prefer a part shade situation, I would say, as examples, but we could go on with sun-loving ones and shadier ones. And then we have that middle category, if we're thinking of vegetation layering of our shrubs, and they can range anywhere from a 3 or 5 foot level on up to almost like an 15 foot or 18 foot level. Red osier dogwood is one that can get quite large if left alone. It's jumpy, sorry. But it also can be pruned very easily. Oops, guess I should not be touching those. Here again, we see the wild ginger, and here is, wait, sorry, I'm losing my place here. So here we see the red flowering currant. This one blooms really early in the spring. It's a hummingbird magnet. It's to me, that's a must-have in the yard. And then on the upper right is the mock orange. It's very, very fragrant. And those are all deciduous. And down below we have evergreens, namely the evergreen huckleberry lower left. And yes, those are edible and tasty. They're just really tiny. We'll take so they'd be very special. You'd have a little tiny batch to put in your pancakes or something. The dull Oregon grape is, there are 3 versions or 3 species of native Oregon grape. This is called the dull Oregon grape, or the low one. This one is more preferential to the shade, but we also have a tall Oregon grape that you would want to put in sunny areas, and another one in between that is probably about 3 foot high, and they all have distinctive look. They all bloom. You can see the berries here, but they bloom pretty early in the spring. And I'm always looking for those early spring bloomers, knowing that we have hummingbirds year round. So they have something to that they can go to for a food source. And the sword fern, we have probably 4 or 5 different native ferns. The sword fern, I'd say, it's just the most resilient and adaptable to sun and shade and wet and dry. It's a great one to include. And here's just a few of the trees, of native trees. Many of them are just too large for most people's yards, but the vine maple is, it's sort of like the Northwest version of the Japanese maple, in that it's similar in structure. It's multi-trunked. It maybe gets up to 20 feet at most. You can see here, it's turning into some beautiful fall color, and it adapts to its conditions. Like, it can be in more shade, and it will have a different habit and fall leaf color than if you had it in full sun. You're looking closely at the cascara. I think those distinctive veining in the leaf is a way to identify it, and it also has some black little round berries for birds. It's the one native tree that is allowed as a street tree because it's a single trunk with a canopy that we, which we need for our street trees. And then, of course, on the right, you can see the Western red cedar, which can get quite large, but it's a wonderful tree, and it has a lot of habitat value. In fact, if you have the room, you should try to include some conifer tree. They're really important for the winter shelter, and of course, they have the cones that are also another food source. So I mentioned the vegetation layering a few times, and essentially it's creating overlapping planes vertically of the vegetation, which diversifies the habitat and defines spaces. And really, if you think of going up vertically, it is making the most of your yard that you have. So here's just a little example. You can see already in this one photo, there's a Douglas fir in the back. So our large native conifers are always the overstory. And then there's a mid-story of deciduous trees, and that would be perhaps our oaks or maples that would be there. And then down to understory, where we have, here you can see actually, this probably isn't the vine maple. It looks like a little Japanese maple. Its leaves are more dissected than the vine maple. Or a dogwood is in there. We have another shrub, which looks like the twinberry. And there's the sword fern that we saw a little earlier. On down to several perennials here. Again, it looks like we're mixing in some non-natives, which is fine. The hosta is in there, autumn fern, and maybe beesia, but we don't need to know that one. And this is a great illustration of showing how the different species of birds prefer these different vertical layers of or canopies of vegetation, up from the, on the very top with the birds of prey and owls, swallows and swifts, down through the other canopy layers of the tree. And when we get down into the shrub layer, you can see what occupies that. And there are a lot of birds that they like to feed from the ground and nest closer to the ground as well. So you get the idea. So, we recommend, striving for those year-round features of the plants that you have. So when you're kind of building a palette and choosing plants, try to find those that, see if you can, how many months you can have something blooming, for example. Or you have shrubs with all kinds of different berries that start out, in the summer and go ideally, hopefully through the winter. And there are a few berries that hang on the trees through the winter. The snowberry is one, or I think of rose hips as well, that will be there through the winter. So we've seen a few of these images before. This is the red flowering currant close up. And hummingbirds love flowers in this red, pink, orange spectrum, a little bit tubular, which these are as well. And right next to it, you're looking at the aster, which this will bloom, say from July through November, or maybe late July, August, September, October. I've seen it bloom in November as well. So that's a really important one because it's harder to find those late summer, fall blooming shrubs or flowers. Upper right, you're seeing this is a rush, probably a rush, Juncus encephalius. And what's good about anything in the grass family, it will have seed heads, and those will tend to hang on through the winter as well. So that's important. here we are back to the vine maple. And it does have flowers in April, and it will have the sumares that follow that. So it is giving you year-round interest, as well as some food sources for birds and pollinators. And this is a nice example of the red twig dogwood when it's lost all its leaves, these beautiful crimson stems and branches on it. And to keep it, and actually if you prune that, it's the new growth is that will have that brightest crimson color. And then after it gets older, it's a little woodier and brownish. So kind of selectively trimming that is really helpful. So let's talk about wildlife habitat. We want to, when the first thing to think of is for habitat is that, yes, you want food sources for the wildlife, but you want to provide access to water. Everything needs to drink water, the bees and butterflies, as well as the birds and other creatures. And then shelter and nesting opportunities. And this is, all kinds of different features you can do to provide that shelter. So let's get into that. By the way, I just have to point this out. This is the non-native Woodlea, which we don't want in our gardens and want replacements for that, but we'll fix that. Okay, so when we think of habitat, as I mentioned, it's food, water, and shelter. So, all of the flowers will provide nectar and pollen for our pollinators. But, as I mentioned with the vine maple, all of our trees usually have some, they're generating pollen as well. And those are going to be nice, large sources. And when you are planting, smaller flowers and perennials, you want to be sure that you're planting them in some good size groupings or swaths is one way we think of it. It's nicer visually rather than a lot of single specimens that give you kind of a confetti effect to the garden. But it also, provides a banquet for the pollinators when they do find it. Upper right, we're seeing, I think it looks like a service berry, and with the fruits just starting to form there. So almost every flowering shrub that you have will also, provide the berries after the bloom. So a double benefit there. And we're seeing again some additional flowers, more of a late blooming one. And this in the middle is it's a bird bath. And you're noticing different rocks and shells and things in there. And the reason that is that way is because it provides different landing platforms for the various size of bees. If it was just a bird bath, it's harder for them to drink from it and things can drown. So this provides little islands to stand on. And down below, you can see this gravel. And if that's wet, that serves as, this is what butterflies like to drink from. That or you can even make a little dish with mud and gravel that you wet for the butterflies as well. And to the bottom right, that is a mason bee house. Naturally, they are a native bee, and they usually are looking for cavities to lay their eggs in, and they usually put it in there with a little nectar, and then they build, they're called mason bee because they build these little clay walls. So each egg, which will hatch into a larva, is each in their own cell, and then they pupate there and emerge as full grown bees in the spring. So if you do provide some of these mason bee boxes, you want to have a design that you're able to clean out each year, so it's ready for a new season of bees. And they're beneficial because they are active a lot earlier than our honeybees, which aren't native, and they really needed to be, they're from the Mediterranean, so they need a lot more warmth to become active. So here we're looking at, this is that little butterfly tray that I mentioned here in the upper left for them to get water from. And but you also want to think about making leaf piles or brush piles. You know, if you've got all the spent stems from your perennial garden, for instance, don't cut those down in the, you know, the fall. I know people are, it's sort of been a tradition or habit to clean gardens up in the fall, but all of those pollinators that you see, many of them are going into their pupa. They're hibernating in the winter in a pupa state, and they use a lot of these stems to get inside of it, especially if they're a pithy, soft stem. So what I just did the other day is I cleaned my winter perennial garden, and I'm just keeping it in a little brush pile till it gets warmer, since it's such a late spring or in terms of warmth this year, and I want to make sure they have a chance to come out of that before I put them in the trash bin or the yard debris bin. So brush piles, oops, and rocks, you know, this is a perfect habitat for the snakes and lizards, and other little amphibians and reptiles. That the warmth of the rock in the summertime is really nice, or wintertime. It holds, what I should say is it holds the warmth that it collects from the sun on into the evenings or into the cooler. But it also holds moisture underneath there as well. And then on the right, what you're looking at is just a dense, what we'd call a hedgerow, or just a, you know, a shrub buffer. It can be a mixed hedgerow, so you have all those different deciduous flowering shrubs with different bloom times and berry harvests, so you get all that variety. Or mix it with some, we have several evergreen large shrubs, or a few species, I should say, like the tall Oregon grape, but also strawberry tree is another one, and silk tassel tree as well. Water conservation. We want to create landscapes that conserve the water and leads to savings on our water bill, which is, if you live in Portland, that's a big portion of your water bill. So of course, the first thing you can do is move more and more to drought tolerant plants. But there's ways you can also conserve water and with the watering practices. But again, I get back to the soil. Know your soil type. And if there isn't much organic matter in it, if it seems pretty hard and compacted, you want to be working a lot of compost into that soil for several reasons. That's what feeds the soil life, all of the microbes and earthworms, etc. And it in itself helps to hold, increase the water holding capacity. It acts like a sponge, just kind of retaining it longer before you know, so it's not drying out as quickly. And if you put the top of your soil, if you add a couple inches of mulch, bark mulch or wood chips, that also additionally helps to hold the moisture in the soil through our summers. And we listed it before, or mentioned before, about grouping plants with similar needs. So that way you're not, if there are some plants that prefer a little bit more wetness, at least they all want the same thing. And conversely, there are some plants, I can think of the red flowering currant is one of them. It really doesn't want too much water in the summer, and I made the mistake of, I had one backing my perennial flower bed that I was watering, and it got too much water and died from it. So we're looking at these methods. There are soaker hoses that can work. I'm not a big proponent of those. I find out that the beginning of the line leaks a lot of moisture, and the end of the line not as much, so it's uneven. But what would be better is to get these kind of rigid poly drip lines, and you can even plug in there's little plugs that you can plug into them. You can see that in this next bottom photo, where you can have a little, they're called kind of spaghetti noodles, hoses and with attached emitters that are low. So it can either drip right from the this hose that you see. I'm calling it a hose, but or you can have these attachments that can bring it right to your plants. And that's very efficient for a number of ways. You're not watering the whole ground, which will encourage weeds. It's not on top of plants, which like overhead sprays would do, that would burn them, possibly in the summer if you had them on in the middle of the day. And the thing with drip is that it's a very slow delivery. And what that accomplishes is that drip, drip, drip actually goes down much deeper and encourages those plants to have deeper roots, which then allow them to withstand the hotter, drier days better too. So let's see. The only thing I missed saying, which I think probably most of you know, it's best to do the cool dark part of the day, either morning or evenings. But I would say mornings are best because they're getting that big drink of water, so in the soil and to their roots, that's going to help them withstand the heat of the day better as well. And you're not losing as much to evapotranspiration. So you can water by hand. But if you do, just again, early in the day, and try to just focus the water on the roots, on the ground. So improving and protecting soil. One thing that we'll talk about it, but there's a lot of ways to improve it. I've touched on it a little bit already, but stabilizing soil becomes especially important on slopes. And that is another benefit of the plants, especially our native plants, is that they'll have nice deep roots that can help hold the soil and stabilize it and prevent erosion. So we can see here for improving, protecting, that mulch, not only, which we're seeing in the first slide on the left, we have mulch on top, but underneath, when these plants were planted, some compost was blended into each planting hole. And also notice that we're using wood chips for the path. So it's all soft, highly absorbent, which does another thing for us. It gets as much water into the ground and prevents storm or rainfall runoff. We talked about removing some lawn. This middle picture is actually an example of a big sheet mulching project I was a part of in a park where we were converting field grasses to a community garden. That's why you see so many volunteers there. And we used to always lay down cardboard to kill the field grass and such beneath, but if you have the leaves and either leaves or bark chips and I would say on top of it, then the thicker it is, that in itself is pretty effective at killing the lawn grasses beneath. And then also, not to forget that, leaves, all the fall leaves that people judiciously bag up and send away, They're very useful for breaking into your beds, especially for over the winter. There's a lot of insects hibernating in those leaves as well. And by having that little blanket over the soil, it helps it from getting compacted. And the leaves are slowly decomposing and providing more nutrients for the soil organisms. Because the rain, just the rain itself hitting soil, can make it very compacted and lose a nice sort of tilth that it should have, with air pockets and pore space for water to drain more easily. So here's a couple of slopes that we're looking at.
6:40 p.m.
And this is covered with our native strawberry. So that's covering the surface with a whole network of roots. But you can also see within that, there's several other native shrubs that are going to put down the deeper roots on that slope. And here's another example on the right where you see quite a variety of plants. The idea being is that you're really getting roots through the whole soil profile, or at least the growing layer of the soil profile. You can also stabilize these slopes by terracing, as you can see in the back of this one picture. Also, we're using smaller terracing here that and helps create this pathway up to the higher zone on the slope, and all these plants in between. And on the right is a pretty severe slope, and what they've done is set rocks into the slope, and that help retain it, and then plant plants in all the nooks and crannies in between. So the other principle we mentioned was rainwater solutions, and the whole idea is to capture the rainwater, whether it's off our roofs or on our driveways, and to convey it and slow it down and send it somewhere where it can soak into the ground, or you might actually harvest it and store it in a big cistern like this that you see. So just quickly, in a natural setting, we'll look at this first diagram on the left. And this isn't even a full forest, but you can see that there's a very little runoff, because a lot of it is going into, it's evaporating into the air from the trees and plants. A lot of it fits in that high, or sort of stays within that high organic layer, top layer of soil, and all the duff and leaves and that are on the ground. And that allows it to infiltrate slowly down into the ground and the groundwater. So as soon as we increase the development or density of development, you can see how these percentages change. There's increased runoff, less evapotranspiration, less being held in the soils beneath, until we get to, this is more of a kind of suburban situation. And you can see we've got 30% of the rain that comes down is runoff that we need to manage somehow. We've got more roads and sidewalks and roofs and garage and driveways all together, until we get to full urban situation with very few places where that water can percolate into the ground. And I would argue that that gets to be more like a 75 to 95% runoff. And so it becomes very much incumbent upon us to manage that runoff and steer it somewhere where it can soak into the ground. And this is a great solution here to create a rain garden. Both of these, and this looks to be a more of a bioswale. They're very similar in their function. It just has more to do with shape and whether it's moving water or not. But with this first one on the left, there's a pipe underground that you don't see. It's coming into this rain garden, which is essentially a very shallow, depressed area that can hold the water. So all of the water is coming off the roof and it's flowing into this rain garden. And it's designed to just fill up to the brim, and then it will drain. That way it has about a day to drain into the ground. And here again, we can see, kind of harkening back to you can do a lot with your soil just so it can absorb more of the rain and hold it and get it into the ground. And this is just another example how you can collect that rooftop to a rain harvesting system. And you've probably seen, soft paths with bark chips. If you do need hard paving, just know that there are pervious pavers out there. This photo on the left, this is actually even a pervious concrete that if you looked at a profile of it, would look kind of like a rice cake. So water can get down through this pavement. Or here's a driveway where they've cut out the center and planted ground covers, and both of these concrete wheel paths are pitched so that they drain into that as well. And if you're inspired, green roofs are another way to capture the rainwater and absorb it, or let it basically it slows it down if it is going to drain down into the ground. At least it's capturing it first so that it drains or percolates slowly. And I mentioned energy conservation. It's mostly referring to summer shade or blocking winter winds. And here's a few examples of that: creating a windbreak hedge, more typically on the north side, or where I live, the east, from the winds from the gorge can be quite strong. So that would be another place to do that. And it's your south and western exposure that you want to provide shade to your house, just to, it would probably reduce the cost of air conditioning if you have that, or just provide a more pleasant outdoor space in our hot summers. And you can see that example to your right on the bottom here, much more pleasant under a tree. So don't forget to plant trees. And then just running through a few examples here. In fact, this one on this page is another rain garden using just shrubs and sedges and rushes. And they are like the workhorses of the rain garden. They naturally grow in our wetlands, so they can be inundated with water at the bottom of the rain garden. Here we see a before and after where the lawn is removed through naturescaping. And here is the after. You can see there's a rain garden there collecting water. The lawn is removed. Nice pathway to move around through it and enjoy it. And of course, that's much more valuable wildlife habitat than the lawn was. Here's another one that was recently installed. So you can see how much space is given to these plants. And having these deep beds gives you the ability to have that layering effect of something tall, something medium, and something low. And nice, generous, in this case, pathways, nice edging in between. And they've really created a little nook or a place to hang out with their campfire there. And here is it some years later. And you can see that was kinnikinnick that they planted there. I talked about that as a nice ground cover. It really fills in and gives you, if you like that massing effect of a green, ground cover, you can get that with kinnikinnick. Very drought tolerant, and it has flowers and berries. It's one of my favorites. So I don't know what's going on in the center back there. I don't know if this was an early spring and that tree is yet to leaf out, but you can see how it's really created a space with the plants to enjoy. Running over. So managing invasive plants is really critical. There's classes to help you learn about and identify them. they essentially, they outcompete our native plants and displace them. And there's some that like tansy that are even harmful to livestock. And what makes these invasives, well, they're invasive because they're not from here. They were brought here and they don't have any competition. And they all reproduce very aggressively. And so it's very important to keep these under control if we want to protect our native environments. And this is a hotline that you can check out. And as you can see, and Andrew will help there talk about how Tualatin can offers these workshops to help you identify them and handle invasives. And if you want additional resources for naturescaping, I think we missed something there. Yes, there it was, it jumped. We are going to be teaching another class in May 6th. This is to focus on site design, how you can go about assessing, planning, and designing a naturescaped garden for yourself. And this will be in person. This is not a Zoom course. And there are all of these ways to find native plants that you can avail yourself to. Oregon Flora, Audubon, Backyard Habitat. And actually both City of Portland has a plant database. And there's a database in East Multnomah Soil and Water District website as well. And this is a wonderful program where you can invite a technician out to visit your site and get you started on the backyard habitat certification process. You can see it involves these 5 criteria, and just go to the backyardhabitats.org and to learn more about that. And I think we are at the end. So
We are. That was wonderful, Laura. Thank you so much. We have a bunch of questions that have already come through, so I'm just going to hop right in. If you do have any questions, feel free to continue to add them to that Q&A, and we will read all of them by the end of the night. So the first question I got was actually emailed to me earlier today. So it's a twofold question. So do you have any suggestions on which understory plants pair best with Oregon white oak? They have 42 Oregon white oaks on about 1/10 of an acre. Their shrub layers coming along really well, but they really want to start focusing on that understory. So the first question is, do you have any good understory plants for underneath an Oregon white oak?
I'm kind of curious as what that shrub layer might be. But when I think of oaks and their natural habitat, it's often meadow around them. And so if you look at the meadowscaping and some of the, say, perennials, flowers that are in that, or some shorter, not our lawn grasses, but other kind of clumping grasses could be a part of that as well. That's what comes to mind for me anyway.
Yeah, I think those are some great suggestions there. Do any any specific plants come to mind for you?
Well, I'm thinking, I'm wondering if these are big oaks where there's a lot of shade underneath. You'd want something that wants to stay, that does well with dry in the summer, because oaks do not really want summer water. So I think the oxalis or redwood sorrel might work for that. Also, the bleeding heart can go kind of dry in the summertime as well. I'm still thinking of part shade rather than sun, but if it's sunny, the traveling strawberry, the ground cover strawberry could work as well.
Nice. Yeah, those are all sounds like some great suggestions. I have a bunch of Pacific bleeding heart in my backyard, and I absolutely love it. It's that plant that like tells me that spring is on the way when I see that
Mhm.
starting to pop a little bit,
Yeah, mine are popping up too. Yeah.
right? So the second part to that question is, so they have read that the tannins in oak leaves can actually suppress the growth of other plants. They'd like to be able to leave as much leaf litter in the fall, but are wondering, or they want to leave as much leaf fall, remain in place as they can, but they'd also like a diverse and vibrant understory. Any thoughts on the tannins in oak leaves suppressing the growth of other plants?
Hmm. It's a good question. I mean, I've also, I hear like oak leaf mold is one of the most valuable mulches. So I'm, maybe it's once it's composted, those tannins are no longer an issue. As I say, I mean, if you we want to be looking to, nature is our cue, and what do we see growing under the trees? That's why I was kind of surprised to hear this person say they had several shrubs established there. um Kind of curious as to what that might be. Oh, I would think, I know what I was thinking is the Oregon grape. The creeping Oregon grape might be another one to consider. And I personally don't have the experience of seeing how the oak leaves are limiting growth. In fact, I go around and collect them because I have a lot of oaks around me here in the Milwaukee area, and I'm composting them. And so I'll see. I'll see how that works.
Yeah, and I
I
and
don't
it's
have
I
all the.
and I was interested to hear that as well, because everything that I've heard with oak leaves is that they actually provide a ton of resources for fungus to really start, and those have a very symbiotic relationship with plants, and so I've almost read that they're more beneficial than not, but I could be completely mistaken.
Yeah, I'm
So
wondering if that's I don't know where the source of that was, but I would, question it. And, I know that walnut leaves you don't want.
mm,
Um,
yeah, I'd be
they
interested.
definitely growth
I,
beneath.
I have a resuresearch project ahead of me tomorrow. It seems like I'm gonna look that up tomorrow.
Mhm. Yeah, we gotta get down to the bottom of that.
That sounds great. All right, so question from tonight. So this person wants to convert a large area that was previously lawn. That area was about 5,000 square feet, but their septic drainage is in the area. Do you have any strategies for that situation?
Um, yeah, I mean, you don't want anything with deep roots in a septic drainage area. Um, Maybe a wet meadow
Mm, yeah,
would do well there. So it wouldn't have something that wouldn't have, big roots or deep roots, but staying with herbaceous plants, the, perennials and grasses is all I can imagine in the septic area. The rest, I would feel free to um, sheet mulch or just, the lawn to get rid of it and plant the larger, deeper shrubs in the rest of in the remaining lawn area.
yeah, that like you were mentioning earlier, creating those layers that might, since it is such a large area, might be a really nice spot to be able to do that.
Yeah, and you do want to think about if it just seems like too much lawn and I don't know what is happening at the, edges or not enough layering, then for sure, think about where you want larger shrubs and or trees, because those are really the structure plants that kind of create the space and or give you a sense of screening or privacy if you need it somewhere. And I assume that I don't know how much of the yard that septic drain field takes up, but But yeah, you don't want anything deep rooted in that for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. Another question from tonight. Do you have any opinion on using olas to water?
Oh, those are the pots that you set in the ground,
That's
correct?
correct. Yep.
Yeah. I think it's a good system because it basically is another method to provide a slow drip into the ground more deeply. And I had a friend, I think he just came up with it himself. He planted this tree on a slope and he put a large ABS pipe in the ground near it, and he puts water down that pipe, which is perforated a little further down, and as a system for doing some deep watering. So whatever methods are out there to facilitate a deeper watering is, in my book, all good. And the slower delivery helps with that, so it doesn't run off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever mechanism sounds like it's right on the right track.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you'll end up having a lot of pots around, I guess.
If you can work it into your landscape design, you'll be
Yeah.
all set, right?
Yeah, or for certain areas, and it doubles as a decorative feature, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had mentioned earlier in the presentation some of the rushes that were in some of the rain gardens. Were those rushes natives? And they want to thank you for putting on the presentation tonight.
Oh, that's so nice of you. Thank you. Yes, we have, I would say, probably a half a dozen different species of native rushes and sedges. And some are bigger, some are more aggressive spreading, they have different features of seeds, some have different colors of blue-green, as opposed to more yellow-green. So again, I can't mention all of them, but there's again, if you avail yourself to those lists, you can look them up and figure out which ones you want to work with. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the resources that I will include in the follow-up email, which is, I know you and I both go-to guide, is the Native Plants for Willamette Valley Yards brochure. It's a nice handheld brochure that goes through a ton of different native plants, including rushes. And so you're easily, yep, there you go. I have mine in my desk as well.
Can you see it? Not really.
Right.
But you can see the shape of it.
There you go. And so that is absolutely one of my favorite guides, and it's nice because it goes through each of the different plant types that are available. It gives you the sun, shade, the moisture requirements, so you can kind of start planning out those different plants.
Yeah, it's a great quick reference.
It
doesn't talk too much about form, and it has little tiny thumbnail pictures, but as a quick reference, it's wonderful. All in one easily carryable, portable little pamphlet there. So
it's definitely a good one as you're starting to think about what your space could eventually look like, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question I have, so this person has a lot of lesser celandine in their yard, in the lawn. Can Kinnikinnick kind of fight back against that? Would Douglas aster be another option, or is there something else?
Ooh, I haven't dealt with this personally, but I've seen enough yards that have it. In fact, one of them I'm working with West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. They've got it. It's just lining a ditch and it's across their yard. It's really pretty serious. And I don't know I don't think anything else is going to outcompete it. I'm sorry to say that you kind of have to bite the bullet and really dig it up and get the roots out. And then once you do that, you can plant things in, and you still may, since it spreads by its underground rhizome roots, every little piece
Mhm.
and start another plant. So, I mean, that's why they're called invasives, is that they're very aggressive in the way they can spread and reproduce. And I'd hate to see you try to put a lot of plants in and be continually fighting the lesser celandine.
Yeah, and I know this is a very timely question. We held our first weed wrangling 101 workshop on
Mhm.
Thursday of this week, and somebody was also dealing with a lesser celandine issue. So passing on that information from the question last week, lesser celandine, any little bulb will grow, and that's why it becomes so difficult. So really, doing the best you can to manually remove it is helpful, but inevitably you're not going to be able to get everything. So if it is a really large infestation, you might end up having to do some sort of chemical treatment to get it to a point where you can better approach doing a different sort of removal method.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't know in your workshops if you make that determination of when you really, choose to use a herbicide to kill it. And I know, I mean, I've worked for Metro for 8 years with scientists that are trying to restore and reclaim huge properties. And, it sort of becomes necessary for the big infestations to get ahead of it, where it's used once and then hopefully you can keep it at bay, through other methods after that.
It is our philosophy on it. It is a tool in the tool belt, so
Mhm.
it's not the one that you automatically go through, really go through an intentional process of figuring out what's the best treatment for you, what's the best treatment for that plant. And once you've kind of done that kind of figuring, then you can then start kind of taking action. But I
Yeah,
would recommend reaching out to either at your conservation district. I'm more than happy to connect you with our invasive species team if you do have questions, or any other. Usually they have extension offices with OSU and other local universities that might also be of help. And if you want to get more information about how to manage weeds, a recording of our weed wrangling presentation is also now on our YouTube channel, so you are able to go back and watch that presentation, because I just uploaded it this morning, so it's fresh off the wires there. Well, I don't have any other questions. Somebody did send out, and somebody did send out a resource for naturescaping with Oregon white oak that I'm going to go ahead and put in
oh,
the
thank you. We
I'm gonna
did
put it
that.
in the chat with if anyone would like to take a look at that resource. And I will also include that in the follow-up email. So you all will receive a link to that resource that was sent by. So thank you, Nanda, for sending that over. I really appreciate it.
We're all always learning, aren't we?
We certainly are, every day, try to at least.
And all my gardening is and no matter what you read, you really, it's like growing. I mean, all my gardens have been like learning labs or pilot projects.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm trying to make a hard clay rocky slope into a beautiful garden. So
And that's why you have yards of chips waiting outside your doorstep.
yes. Yes, this is my third truckload in 3.5 years.
There you go. There you go. You have to just keep doing it.
Yeah,
Well, thank you again, Laura. I truly
thank
appreciate
you.
you spending the evening with us tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us. So as I mentioned, I will send up that follow-up email later this week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to answer it myself or connect you with one of our specialists if I don't have an answer. Well, thank you again, everyone.
Okay, thank you.